peace light shines when I meet love. I get my peace from high above. My peace is strength and shall grow strong. But when we love, it can't be wrong. My peace light shines.
Hello, welcome to PIMA, live from New York City. My name is Sheikh Moussa Drammeh. I'm your host. PIMA stands for Public Emergency Management Adherence. And PIMA is a program where we invite special guests to talk about what we have in common in promoting peace and preventing violence and crimes in our communities. And for the past several years, PIMA has received dignitaries from very wide range of scholars and politicians and law enforcement and even students, just to talk about what is going on now in our lives and way forward, how we can use our resources and our talents and our neighborliness to making our communities better. So today is no different, and I'm sure you will extremely be excited about this program today because we have a preeminent scholar in the subjects that we will be discussing concerning Islam, Muslims, and the issues that the Islam and the Muslim world are facing right now. And to even broaden it, I would say the same issue that the whole world is facing, good and bad. So we have a preeminent scholar who has written several books in various subjects concerning these areas. And Dr. Omar Salem is our guest today, and we will be discussing various aspects of Muslims, their lives, and even the issues now that are affecting the immigrants all over the world from the Muslim world, and also how we can work together to resolve some of the conflict areas in the Muslim world as well as non-Muslim but Muslim immigrant communities in the West. So with that, please join me. Welcome Dr. Omar Salem from Yale University in Hartford, Connecticut. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks. So Dr. Salem, we are grateful for having you here today to PIMA. And now the whole world is looking at the Muslim world, meaning that we are on the spotlight, unfortunately, not for the better part, but for the worse. And you have written several books, and you have dealt in depth with these issues, past, present, and future collaboration for peace in the Middle East as well as throughout the Muslim world. So I want you to first introduce yourself first, and then we go in depth to the issues that are now in the hearts and minds of everybody in the world.
Sure, my pleasure. Like you mentioned, I have authored several books. I'm actually a native of Egypt. Giza is where I was born, in Egypt, where the Great Pyramids are. The whole family immigrated to this country over 4 decades ago, and we settled in California. I moved here to the East Coast to earn a degree at Yale University in comparative religious studies. And it has always been a subject that interested me. I did that after a successful career in business and engineering. But I was always interested in the subject of comparative religion because I wanted to know the relationship between the different Abrahamic traditions and how it was intended for that relationship to be a peaceful relationship between those three traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Like you mentioned at the beginning of the introduction, the world now is seeing a lot of extremism. In my opinion, it's a lot of misuse and abuse of religious text to justify certain actions in the name of religion. if one looks closely at those three traditions, and I happen to be a scholar of both the Bible and the Quran, in that I studied both books. And I deducted a certain relationship between people who adhere to the Bible and people who adhere to the Quran, in how it was intended that way, and how it was intended that those people live in peace as neighbors. So I will speak about the Quran, and from time to time I refer to the Bible.
Okay.
But let me speak about the Quran. The Quran is a book that is revealed to Prophet Muhammad, as we all know, in Mount Hira, outside of Mecca. And it's a text that came to us in the Arabic language. It was revealed in the Arabic language, set in writing in that language, and later on translated to other languages. Anyhow, in that book, we have very important instructions as to how this book relates to the traditions that preceded that book, namely Judaism and Christianity, or namely the Torah and the Injil. Before that book was revealed, Almighty Allah, God, revealed those two other books, those two inspired books, the Torah for the Jewish people, and also the Injil for the Christian people. Those books are mentioned by name in the Quran, and they are praised in our book, in the Quran. The question that people often ask, why a third book was necessary? Why not just follow the Bible, those two previous books, and especially that the Torah speaks about a future Messiah, or a future person who would save the world, and the Injil talks about the fulfillment of that. So there is a prediction and a fulfillment of that prediction. Why was the Quran necessary? That's always a question that might be on the back mind of some people. The Quran was necessary because the Israelites who received the Torah, and by the way, most of the prophets in our book, in the Quran, the Quran mentions about 25 messengers and prophets. More than half of those are from Bani Israel, are the children of Israel. Now, the Quran tells us that when the gospel of Jesus Christ was revealed, there was a big debacle among the Israelites, whether to accept him or to deny him. And many of the Israelites denied him, and based on that, rabbinical Judaism was born, and many more followed him, and that's where Christianity was later formulated and born. So those two traditions had challenges throughout the ages and the years. The Quran actually came to reconcile between them. I would fetch to say that in chapter 16, verse number 64, speaks succinctly about how God revealed the Quran to our Prophet Muhammad in order to reconcile between the two previous traditions, and to also teach the nomads or the Arabs that lived in Saudi Arabia or lived near Mecca at the time, teach them about the unity of God, and teach them about the importance of morals and ethics and so forth. So that's really the purpose of the Quran. And if we understand that purpose, we will live as very good neighbors with our Ahlul Kitab, as I call them. Jews and Christians are termed in the Quran as Ahlul Kitab. So Muslims are Ahlul Quran, and Jews and Christians are Ahlul Kitab. If we understand that relationship as it is told to us in the Quran, and the Arabic text is very clear where it says in that chapter that I cited, chapter number 16, verse number 64, and I will say it in Arabic and then translate. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وما أنزلنا عليك الكتاب إلا لتبين لهم الذي اختلفوا فيه وهدى ورحمة لقوم يؤمنون. O Prophet Muhammad, we have revealed this book to you in order to show people who came before you that which they are quarreling about, that which they are disputing, and to make that clear to them, to make clear to those people before you that which they are disputing. And it's a guidance and mercy to mankind. So that guidance and mercy cannot be achieved until we do the first part of the ayah that shows, that clearly explain to people of the book that which they are disputing in a way that is loving, in a way that is helpful. In another chapter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُجَادِلُوا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنْهُمْ. So that the verse says, do not speak with people of the book except in a kind way, in a respectful way. It except those transgressors. There's an exception in the ayah. However, the Muslim is commanded to have a good relationship with his neighbors and know that his neighbor, whether it's a Jew or a Christian, that person also have a book that was revealed from God. And if I want the Jew or the Christian to respect my book, I should also give them the same opportunity and respect that they have a book that they follow.
So now, as it is common that a lot of Islamic scholars believe that the arrival of Prophet Muhammad pretty much cancels all the books and all the messages, and if either you are completely Muslim or you are pretty much nothing.
Okay.
How do you answer that?
Okay, let me share that with you. Thank you for the question. Nowhere in the Quran, by the way, the Quran has 6,236 verses. Nowhere in the Quran it says that the Quran has cancelled previous books. What it says in the Quran, that Allah revealed this Quran مصدقا لما بين يديه. It didn't say مبطلا أو مزيلا, which are the Arabic terms for cancelling or abrogating. It says مصدقا لما بين يديه. And that word in the Arabic language means confirming those revelations. So the Quran really came to confirm the revelations that came to Ahlul Kitab.
Ahlul Kitab meaning?
Ahlul Kitab means Jews and Christians.
Okay.
This is the Arabic term for people of the book. Jews have a book and they should be held accountable for their book. Christians also have a book and they should be held accountable to their book. And the Quran came to hold those traditions to their own book. In fact, we have verses in chapter 5 in the Quran that ask the Jews, for example, to educate based on what's in their book. So it's not cancelling their book. It says in chapter 5, كيف يحكموك وعندهم التوراة فيها حكم الله. O Prophet Muhammad, how would they come to you, how would the Jews come to you to educate between themselves and resolve their disputes when they have the Torah that has a solution for all their predicaments? The same way with Christians. We have a verse in the same chapter, verse number 47, chapter 5, that says, وَلْيَحْكُمْ أَهْلُ الْإِنْجِيلِ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ. Let the people of the gospel, of Jesus Christ, educate based on the text of that book, of the gospel. So the Quran really calls for each tradition to educate based on what's in that tradition. So to say that the Quran canceled all that is really something that's invented later on. It is not something that was part of the original scripture to Prophet Muhammad. But yes, there was a certain in the hadith tradition, which by the way was collected and written 300 years after the demise of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or after the death of Prophet Muhammad, where the meaning, where one can interpret from the hadith that was written 300 years later, or collected 300 years later, that Quran has abrogated or cancelled. But if you go to the pristine source, if you go to the Quran, it doesn't say that. So I, here in this forum, in this podium, I invite my Muslim brothers and sisters to please give priority to the Quran. Give priority to what is written in the Quran. And if there is a hadith, like I said, that was written 200, 300 years later, let's go back and look at that hadith and make sure that it doesn't negate the Quran and it doesn't conflict with the Quran. Because that's really what we're suffering from in the Ummah today. What we're suffering from the Ummah today is that we took the Quran, we put it behind our back, and then we're using the books of hadith. And these books of hadith are, unfortunately, have more hadith that are fabricated, more hadith that are weak, than they have hadith that is sahih, or hadith that is actually authenticated from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The hadith that are authenticated were mentioned in a famous book of hadith by Imam Al-Muwatta, by Imam Malik. The hadith in that book has 1,500 hadith. Later on, we have 100,000 hadith. There is no way that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, could have said all these hadith. Plus, the Quran itself say Allah has revealed everything we need to know. وَمَا فَرَّطْنَا فِي الْكِتَابِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. That is a verse. We did not neglect to put anything you need as a Muslim. We never neglected anything in this book. So if we are going to use hadith, it has to be authenticated and it has to be in agreement with the Quran.
Now for the things that is now in the hearts and minds of everybody, where you see, individuals who may call themselves whatever name, but have flags and statements that identify them as Muslims and fighting for the cause of Islam and calling Allah's names.
Yes.
What would you say, give them the excuses of using the same Quran that you use, to commit heinous crime that they're committing in the name of Islam, according to them?
I must admit, yes, there are heinous crimes that are committed in the name of Islam today. And we have groups in Syria, in Iraq, we have groups in Afghanistan, in Nigeria, Boko Haram. I mean, we have groups in many places that claim to adhere to a pristine version of Islam and claim to say that we are the true Muslims, and everybody else who does not think the way we do and does not do what we do is really considered an infidel or a kafir or murtad, apostate. So we are being challenged today. Today we are really being challenged. Our religion is being challenged. Many people say that religion has been hijacked by those groups. I would say that, those groups tend to be the most vocal ones because they spill a lot of blood, and the media here in the West tend to capitalize on that, meaning that they have a motto in the media: if it bleeds, it leads. So anything that has violence or killing or something like that tends to come to the media and be brought into mass production. those groups, whether it's ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram or any of these extreme groups, do in fact rely on Quran and Hadith. But here's what they did. Here is the challenge that they did. Here's what they did. They relied on a book that was written about 400 years after Prophet Muhammad passed away by a scholar called Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi. It's a book called An-Nasikh wal-Mansukh. What is this science called An-Nasikh wal-Mansukh that they introduced? This science is really the science of taking certain verse in the Quran and saying that that verse has abrogated all these other verses in the Quran. So they took a verse in chapter number 9, Surah At-Tawbah, and then they called that the sword, the verse of the sword. And then they said that that particular verse has abrogated close to 215 verses in the Quran. So when you come to one of those Muslim brothers and tell them, look, I mean, the Quran here say no coercion in religion. The ready answer for you will be, oh, that verse has been abrogated by the verse of the sword. If you tell them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقُلْ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ مَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Allah has revealed truth. Those who want to believe it, they're welcome. Those who don't want to believe it, it's up to them. They'll say you that that's also been cancelled or been abrogated. If you tell them many verses, وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا, speak to people with kindness. Invite people with wisdom to Islam. So they tell you this is all abrogated and cancelled. So they use that as basis where they have actually stripped the Quran of the verses that promote mercy, kindness, and reaching to the other person and being helpful and so forth and cooperating. They stripped all that and they left the verses that talk about violence and jihad, which were actually were revealed to Prophet Muhammad based on contextual wars or contextual events that were happening during that time, where he was being attacked by other tribes who wanted to sabotage his newly found religion and wanted to really destroy it. And that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed certain verses to Prophet Muhammad to defend the newly founded ummah and not to go on the attack. But unfortunately those groups have selectively what we call is cherry-picked from the Quran verses. And then the major problem that we are facing is that they took certain hadith and somehow they used the meaning in those hadith to go and justify killing and committing all kinds of atrocities. We have ulama in the ummah today who are totally against this and see that this is actually definitely not a way to invite people to Islam, let alone a way to manage the Muslim population. And hence we have all these challenges and all these problems.
So is there any justifiable situations in Islam where suicide bombing can be approved?
From my own reading as a scholar of the seerah of Prophet Muhammad, I have not come across a situation where he condoned suicide. I must profess that I don't know everything. I don't speak for all Islam. But from what I have read and have seen, I have not found a hadith, for example, that says you should go and commit such acts of blowing up yourself to take away other people who are innocent and have nothing to do with what you are doing. And in fact, the famous hadith by Prophet Muhammad, where he sent an emissary to Yemen from Mecca, one of the Sahaba, and told him, "O Mu'adh, when you go to Yemen, how will you invite them to Islam?" And Mu'adh said, "I would invite them by sharing with them what's in the Quran, and sharing with them what is in the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, and invite them by using what's in the Quran." But it was never mentioned in that hadith or in any other hadith that he should go and start, killing and do any warring with the people he's inviting to Islam. However, what I see here is that these groups, this what we call in the West terrorist groups, and what I see is that it's a reaction. It's a reaction. It's a reaction to certain United States foreign policy. Many in the Muslim world see certain foreign policy by the United States as being threatening to them, or subjugating, or taking away their resources. That's how they perceive it. And they don't know any other way of countering that except by to resort to violent means. So we here in the United States, and I'm speaking as a US citizen now, should also review our foreign policy towards nations that don't want us to be there, for example. They don't want our bases, or they don't want our troops to be there, or something like that. And find the source of aggravation. Why are we there? Why are these people being aggravated? Because we don't want to necessarily lose our soldier or become less safe to travel elsewhere. We had 9/11 here, and we, based on that, went and made 2 campaigns, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan, in hopes that the world will be a safer place. God knows how much money we spent. Trillions of dollars were spent on those wars. Our unborn children may have to carry some of this debt to repay it back. But the question is, are we safer now than we were before we started these 2 wars? I'll let the audience judge for themselves on that.
So, great. So we're about to begin the conversation. Anyway, we have about 1 minute left of our 4th segment. I just want briefly to set light on, what the media widely circulated, that these, terrorists are terrorizing people because of the promise that they will get in heaven, such as having virgins waiting for them and stuff like that. What would you say about that?
Well, there are, in fact, hadith that talk about the reward of the person who engages in jihad. So I cannot deny that that hadith does exist. The question is, how do you define jihad? And jihad against whom? And why? And the causes of jihad. There is a famous Muslim scholar by the name of Ibn al-Qayyim, who lived in the Sham area, present-day Syria, approximately 700 years ago, where he wrote about the subject of jihad in his writings, he said that there are certain conditions that have to be met before one can engage in jihad or declare jihad. Because what you want to do is defeat the enemy inside of you before you try to defeat the enemy outside. So what Ibn al-Qayyim said in his book, he said that you should defeat shaitan and nafs and lower desires before you try to go out after the so-called kafir and munafiq and mushrik and so forth. What is happening today is that we are not looking at our own shortcomings, brother. We are always projecting that there is a big conspiracy and there is people out there to get me. And even though I don't know how to make wudu and salah properly, I'm going out there and declaring jihad.
So, you've written a book, several books. This is one of them, The Missing Piece, which I am reading now. And the more I read about the book, you know, the more my questions are answered. And I'm extremely gratified by how you put, you know, issues into place, and also the fact that for those who are inclined toward peace can benefit from it. So the book is called The Missing Piece. So can you talk to us about what is happening in the Middle East, and what would you suggest to be the necessary steps toward a peaceful coexistence among all the inhabitants from the Islamic perspective primarily?
Okay. Yes, like you mentioned, I did research that subject quite succinctly, because frankly I view the conflict in the Middle East, the Israel-Palestine conflict. I view that that particular conflict has a religious component. Some people might disagree and say this is a political conflict, or this is a conflict over resources, so economic conflict, or it's a sociological conflict. But at the end of the day, this is a conflict that has a very serious religious component. And we have to acknowledge that, because until we diagnose this conflict properly, we will not be able to address it properly, and there will be more conflicts and more struggle and more violence in that part of the world. In fact, the Quran talks about that region, the region of Israel-Palestine. And the Quran gives a name to that region. The name Israel and the name Palestine are mentioned, but they're not mentioned in the Quran. They're mentioned in the Torah. They're mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, we see in the book of Genesis a mention of Arad Philistine, the land of the Philistines, or the land of Palestine. And we see in the book of Samuel a mention of Ard Israel, the land of Israel. But in the Quran, there is no mention of the land of Israel or the land of Palestine. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it the Holy Land, or Al-Ard Al-Muqaddasa. Now, that land has a history of so many powers coveting that land, and coveting having a presence in that land, or having hegemony over that land. Before Islam, there had been many powers that conquered that land, including the Romans, who are credited or accused of having demolished a temple that was there in Jerusalem, where Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, used to preach. After the destruction of that temple, which took place 70 years after, 70 years AD, or after the death of Jesus, there was a period there where the Israelites were scattered all over the world. And there were other powers that came and took over that piece of land, including the Byzantine and the Persians, or we call it in Arabic Rome and Persia. They took that land and they governed that land, and there were always a presence of Christians and Jews in that land, which are in Islam called Ahlul Kitab. So Ahlul Kitab are part of that land. The land is called the Holy Land. So those are the Quranic terms. So the Quranic terms doesn't focus much on Jews, Christians, and Israel, Palestine, but it focuses more on Holy Land and Ahlul Kitab. So that's the Quranic background.
And the Ahlul Kitab again means?
Ahlul Kitab means Jews and Christians.
Okay.
People of the book. It's both. They're both lump sum into Ahlul Kitab.
Okay.
Because in Arabic, Kitab means book, and Ahl means people of. So these are people of the book. In Hebrew, it's Am HaSefer, people of the book. Now, what's beautiful about this is that if we use the Quranic terms to describe this land and to describe the people there, we will have peace tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay. Now, we are not using those terms today. We are not using Quranic terms. Even though we're fighting in the name of Islam, the name of Quran and all that, but we're far away from using those Quranic terms. We're saying Palestinian political rights. On the other side, they're saying Israel and the land of Israel, and they're crying over that. And then we're using Jews and Christians. Jews, Christians, Muslims. So these are dividing terms. Dividing terms. The Quran, because it's an inspired book and it is truly a book of peace, if you in your heart desire peace, if you in your heart desire violence, conflict and war, you will always find verses in the Quran that gives you that right. So it really depends on what you want. Now, the Quran as it stands is definitely a book of kindness, peace, tranquility. And if you want to make it something else, you could. I'm not saying you cannot, you could. By cherry picking verses to make that happen, like I mentioned earlier. And this is not unique to the Quran. The Bible is the same way. The Bible is a book of peace. But if you want to make it a book of war, a book of holy war, or jihad as we call it, you can make it that way. You can pick and choose verses and chapters, like in the book of Samuel, for example, to make it a book of violence and killing. But the book was not intended for that. Neither the Bible nor the Quran was intended for that. Because we're all creation of Almighty God. We're all His, in a metaphorical sense, we're all His children. There is nothing wrong with saying that. In Arabic, there is that term, even though many scholars tend to try to discount it or denounce it. But in Arabic, the hadith says, Al-Khalqu Iyalullah. Creation are the children of Allah. So we as Muslims have a certain obligation towards this holy land. Israel, Palestine, I'll call it the Holy Land, which is roughly the area between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea and the Jordan River. And if we use the Quranic terms of calling that area, just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called it in the Quran, the Holy Land, there would be so much peace in that region. If we stop calling it the land of Israel, the land of Palestine, we would have peace, according to what I researched and what I found. Also, if we call the people who live there people of the book, they have a book to be respected, and I want to hold the Jews accountable to their Torah. They are violating the Torah, yes. We are violating the Quran as well. So many Muslims are violating the Quran, many Jews are violating the Torah, many Christians are violating the gospel. But that doesn't mean that the book should be cancelled. Just because Muslims are misusing the Quran doesn't mean that Quran is a book of Satan. Just like some Jews are not abiding by what the Torah says, doesn't mean that the Torah is a book of Satan or a satanic book. All it means is that we human err, but we have a book that's inspired, a book that we should all respect, and all these books call for worshiping God, being kind to your neighbor, loving God, loving your neighbor, paying your share of charity to the poor, honoring your parents, speaking truth, do not steal, do not kill, do not murder. All those commandments are found in all three books. So all we have to do is just respect each other. Now, what is happening in Israel-Palestine is that I really consider that conflict to be a proxy war or a proxy conflict, where the evangelical Christianity is at odds and at conflict with radical Islam. Radical Islam is saying that no Jew should be in that land and should all be purged of all the Jews, and the Jews are descendants of pigs and apes, which again taken verses from the Quran out of context to use them to insult other human beings. When Allah mentioned in the Quran pigs and apes, He was describing Jews who don't respect the Sabbath. So He was describing a group of Jews who violated their own book, their own commitment, their own commandment with Allah, their own covenant with Allah. So we should not be taking that and say they're all that way. In fact, the Quran has some very derogatory text against us Arabs. It's not like all Arabs are good and all non-Arabs are bad. No. The measuring stick in the Quran is whether you are God-fearing person or not. It has nothing to do with your color of your skin or what family you come from or your background or your language, nothing like that. At any rate, the challenge we have in Israel-Palestine is that we are not using the Quran as our basis for educating that problem. We are resorting to the UN Charter. And some countries respect the UN Charter, others don't. Well, the UN Charter says there should be 2 countries in that piece of land. One for the Jews, one for the Arabs. Some Jews object to that and say, we cannot allow the Arabs to live or have hegemony over the West Bank because it is an area that threatens our security. That's what they say. On the other hand, the Palestinians are saying we are living under occupation. We are living under terrible conditions because we don't have equal rights as the Israelis. Any Jew anywhere in the world can come and have a home in that land, and we are the indigenous people can't even return to our homes that have been taken away from us. So we do have a major problem and a major challenge there. The solution, in my mind, as a researcher and a scholar in Islam, is to start calling that land the Holy Land. By calling that land the Holy Land, it's holy to whom? It is holy to all three traditions. The Jews consider it holy because many of their prophets preached there, including Prophet David and Prophet Solomon, or King David and Solomon. Christians call it Holy Land. It's holy to them because Jesus Christ preached there and had his ministry in that land. Muslims call it holy because tradition has it that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, ascended to heaven from there. So it is holy to all three traditions. Now, there comes a question as to the relationship between Muslims and Ahlul Kitab as it relates to this land. We Muslims are there to respect that land and to worship in that land, anywhere in the land. Jews have a specific place in that land to worship God. And that place that they have in that land is mentioned in our book, in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the second chapter, Surah Al-Baqarah, in verse number 145, says in Arabic, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ولو أتيت أهل الكتاب بكل آية ما تبعوا قبلتك وما أنت بتابع قبلتهم وما بعضهم بتابع قبلة بعض. This is what it says. It says, O Prophet Muhammad, people of the book have their destination for prayer. And their destination for prayer is different from your destination of prayer. They will not follow your destination of prayer, and I'm asking you not to follow their destination of prayer. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has separated those two groups for a wisdom that only Allah knows. Why He separated those two groups, Allah only knows. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Prophet Muhammad to worship towards Mecca, and told the people of the book, mainly the Israelites, children of Israel, or as we commonly call them, the Jews, to worship towards Jerusalem. So from that perspective, Jerusalem is important to people of the book. And that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that. That's the Quran saying that. So for me to deny them that and to say that they have no history there and they should not be there and all that, would be denying something important in my own theology, in my own tradition, in my own book. On the other hand, the Jews who are settling there, who live there, should treat their neighbors with kindness. And remember that they were slaves in the land of Egypt. That's the book of Leviticus tells them that. Tell them, treat your neighbor with kindness, and remember, you were in bondage, you were enslaved in the land of Egypt. So if I can hold the Jews to what's in their book, in the Torah, and hold the Muslims to what's in their book, in the Quran, we can have peace in that region tomorrow. And if we have peace in that region tomorrow, much of the conflicts that you see in Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, many of these places around that area will gradually disappear, go away. When neighbors respect each other, it doesn't matter whether they live in one state or two states. I prefer to see them both live in one state and live in peace in one state. But if two states are a must, then I proposed a two-state solution that is different from what is being negotiated right now, or what is being proposed by the United Nations right now. That has been rejected by one side and insisted upon by the other side. I am, in this book, proposing a two-state solution if we have to go to that. Like I said, my preference is for both people to live in one state.
Sure. So on that context, for both the Arabs and the Jews to live in one state.
Yes.
This state will be Jewish majority state, governed by Jews, or how would it function?
Yeah. There is a fear in the heart of the Jews of their Palestinian neighbor, of the Arabs, of the Muslims, overwhelming them and then subjugating them and oppressing them. It's a fear. Whether it's well-founded or whether it's grounded in reality, one can debate that. But it's a fear, and me as a Muslim, I have to respect that. I respect that they have a fear. They fear me. Okay, so I say, okay, you fear me, fine. I'm going to start building trust with you. We have to take steps that build trust with the Jewish people. Some people might object here and say, but wait a second, we didn't commit atrocities against the Jewish people the way Christian Europe did. That's true. Christian Europe was very anti-Semitic. Christian Europe did commit considerable atrocities against the Jews. Killings took place in Spain in a process called the Inquisition, in Russia in a process called the pogrom, and in Germany and the surrounding countries in a process called the Holocaust. These things happened, and the Jews were the victims of that. Jews in general want to own that victimhood. They want to say, oh, we are the victims. Okay. Even though I don't consider them victims now, because now they have a state, they're doing very well. But they like to still own and call themselves victims. So I'll say, okay, you want to call yourself that? That's fine. You are the victim. You're living here on that piece of land. Do not oppress your Palestinian neighbors. Give them equal treatment, and you will live in peace with your neighbor. The challenge we're facing is that, like I said at the beginning, in my mind as a scholar, this is more of a proxy war, because Jews are pushed, whether they admit it or not, they're pushed by evangelical Christianity, Christian Zionism, that pushes the Jews to violate sacred places for the Muslim people, which is the Haram Sharif, or the Temple Mount. So when they are pushed to do that, and we get Jews who push their way to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then they call it, well, this is our place and you are the occupier. They're calling the Palestinians the occupiers. Then we start having challenges and problems. On the other hand, the Palestinians are also pushed not to have peace with their Jewish neighbors. In what way? Whenever a Palestinian says, okay, you know what, I don't see anything wrong with these Jews. I can live with them. They can be my neighbor, and we can cooperate. They get pushed by radical Muslim elements outside the Holy Land, who tell them, wait a second, you're agreeing to live next to the descendants of pigs and apes? You're agreeing to have them as your neighbor? They are polluting that land. You should commit violence against them. So what is happening to us, Brother Moses, is that outside powers, whether it is Christian Zionism or evangelical Christianity on one side, or radical Islam on the other side, feeding each side in the conflict in ways to promote that violence, unfortunately. To solve that from our side as Muslims, my call from this podium to everyone who is listening to me, to start calling that land the Holy Land, and to start calling the people who live in that land as Ahlul Kitab, and to start learning a little bit about their book. I ask and I implore my Muslim brothers and sisters, especially those who live in the Holy Land, to learn a little bit about the book that the Jews consider sacred to them. And I also ask and implore the Jewish people, especially those who live in the Holy Land, to read the book that Muslims consider holy and they respect. And in order not to read the whole book, I will just tell my Jewish audience to read chapter 49 of the Quran. It is 2 pages or 3 pages. Just focus on chapter 49. And it has so many guidance that you can hold your Muslim neighbor in check by holding him to the standards of that chapter. And as to the Muslim who lives in the Holy Land, you don't have to read the whole Bible. You don't even have to read the whole book in the Bible. Just go to chapter Deuteronomy. In Arabic it's called Kitab al-Tathniyah. And go there to chapter 27 and just read that chapter. And in it you will find so many wisdom, so much maw'izah and advice that you can hold your Christian and hold your Jewish neighbor to.
Well, it has been a very, very wonderful opportunity to hear from an Islamic scholar discussing the issues that are of concern to the world, you know, whether it's a Middle Eastern issue or the Islamic issues or the terrorism or extremism or way forward. So we want to have you back so that we can continue on in depth to, you know, this book, which is, again, the missing piece, as well as other books, so that people will understand that there is a solution highlighted here that, if followed, will bring peace, you know, in the Holy Land. So we're grateful that, you know, you came, and thank you, and, you know, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you longevity and more success.
Thank you.
And may, you know, a lot of people get a chance to read your book, so that finally for the information about this program, you can go to, you know, peacedecember.org, www.peacedecember.org, or you can call me at 718-822-5555. And if you want to get the missing piece, you can get it from Amazon. Just Google or type in the missing piece, Dr. Omar Salem. Thank you.